I've driven nearly every single electric Hyundai you can buy, and here's the latest one. This is the 2024 version of the base Ioniq 5, which has the 58 kilowatt hour battery, which is the smallest battery, and it's also the most affordable Ioniq 5. I've been living with it for a week, and I'm gonna let you know what it's like to live with and if it's actually worth buying. And you can also do the same if you visit productreview.com.au, because there you can read reviews of people who bought and owned a bunch of different cars, and you can also review your own car there. So Hyundai wants you to pay $65,800 for this entry-level model, and that's still quite a lot of money for an electric car, considering we have a lot of rivals out now from BYD, and we've even got the new Tesla Model 3 Highland and the Tesla Model Y, which are all competing around this price. But there are plenty of buyers out there, maybe even you, that don't really want a Tesla and you don't really trust BYD because it's still a relatively new brand. And so that leaves you with options like the Kia EV6 and even this, the Ioniq 5. So let's peel back the features that you get and also tell you whether or not they're good. For starters, you still get this pretty cool light bar up the front. You've also got these pixel LED lights, which just look fantastic. You get a giant Hyundai badge on the bonnet, so there's no mistaking this for any other car. And you've also got these active shutters down here, which open and close depending when the car needs air. And you also get a camera up here, which is for your 360-degree parking camera. And also, if you look behind this cover, this is actually a transparent cover because there's a pixel effect happening behind here, which is the theme for the Ioniq 5. That is pixels. Boom, here it is. Here are the alloy aero wheels you can get for the base Ioniq 5. They're a smaller 19-inch design, but they're wrapped in a Michelin tire. And I can't argue with the fact that these are just so much more comfortable to ride around on compared to the bigger wheels you can get on the more expensive Ioniq 5s, but I'm just not a huge fan of the design. You also get regular mirrors, which have cameras on the side for your parking cameras, and that's a bit odd because the more expensive Ioniq 5s get cameras on the side, but this one does not get that. And you also get these door handles which pop open and close automatically depending if you lock and unlock your car, and these are really fun to play with, so don't give this key to your kids who would probably do this for hours. Even though this is the base model, you're not getting base model features. This thing will still move forwards and backwards with this remote control that you have here on the key. So if you want to move the car a bit forwards and backwards after you've parked, it's pretty good. And you can also do this to move out of an awkward car space as well. Now, because this is rear motor, rear wheel drive, you get a larger front trunk space, and you can also get this included charging cable, which brings us to the topic of charging. Now, under your power operated charge cover port here, you will see your DC fast charger, which has pixels to indicate how much charge you have left. Now, this 58 kilowatt hour battery has a claim range of around 384 kilometers of WLTP range, but according to evdatabase.org, it's going to have less than 300 kilometers of real world range, around 290 kilometers. But since Hyundai have enabled this to DC fast charge at a rate of 175 kilowatts, you should be able to charge this from 10 to 80% in around 18 minutes. And a fun fact, the Tesla Model 3 Highland can only charge up to 170 kilowatts from a DC fast charger, so it's slightly quicker to charge than that, but it does have a smaller battery and less range in that car. But of course, one of the most appealing things about the Ioniq 5 is its design, because it's in between a hatchback and an SUV. Hyundai wants you to think of this as an SUV, but it really is just a larger hatchback. Now, this base model misses out on a power tailgate and it gets a manual hatch instead, but I've actually really liked using this because it's just so simple to use. Here in the back, you get more space than a Tesla Model 3 because you have a hatchback. So I guess you could sort of compare it to a Tesla Model Y, but again, this sits in between a Tesla Model 3 and a Tesla Model Y in terms of its sizing. Now, you do get a large hatch space here. You've also got a manual cover here, and you've also got a little bit more space underneath the boot floor. But you don't get a spare tire. Instead, you get a tire repair kit, which is kind of useless. But that's like most EVs nowadays. It's kind of a surprise to see one when it does get an actual spare tire. You get a 12-volt socket in the back, and your seats do fold in a 60-40 split, but this rear boot is very useful for a bunch of different suitcases and bags and even large items. You get a pretty good amount of space in the back, and I love how your air vents are here on the pillars rather than the middle, so they feel more individual. You get a decent armrest here in the middle, and these seats are very well cushioned, even though these are the base seats with this new wool material, which is meant to be better for the environment. And that's because it's made out of recycled materials. You do have ISOFIX points in the back, and this is a pretty comfortable rear seat if you're a 5'11" adult like me. And I also do like the soft white lighting we get instead of that harsher yellow lighting in some cheaper electric cars. You get a flat load floor in the back, so the middle seat's actually very comfortable, but we do get old school USB-A ports, and we also do get a household plug here in the back, which I love because if you are someone who works from home and you want to take your car with you somewhere different from your home, you can at least take your laptop with you and charge it in here instead of having to be tied to an actual power point in a building. And I will will say all the materials inside this base Ioniq 5 do feel quite nice, even though this is an entry-level model. This still feels very premium, and you could fool anyone that this is way more expensive than it actually is. And I also do like the blue ring lighting you get around the speakers in the lower parts of the doors, which just adds to the cabin ambience. But the door bins are kind of small all throughout the cabin, which is very annoying. Nothing's really changed up front in the Ioniq 5, not even the software. So when we start this thing up using the push button start, which is different compared to a Tesla, which doesn't have a key at all, this thing will beep at you just a little bit, and then you get two 12-inch displays, which haven't been updated with any new software. So they look exactly the same as they've always have, which is fine, but they're very basic in their operation. And if you own something like a Tesla or even a BYD, this feels pretty old school and very traditional. I do love the large flat dashboard, so I've got a great view out and lots of light here in the cabin, even though we don't have a glass roof. We get a glove drawer instead of a glove box like we always have, which is great for storing things like a water bottle. And we still get this weird little shelf here below the screen, which can't really hold anything, but it does look and feel nice if you want to touch the screen. It's a good place to pivot your hand from. We get a bunch of physical buttons down below, but no home button, so it's a bit frustrating to jump between the car menu and also Apple CarPlay. And Apple CarPlay and Android Auto is not wireless here. Even in 2024, you still have to use a USB-A cable to plug in your phone. The most annoying thing about that is that USB-A connection is down here near your feet, not up here with the other two USB-A ports, which would be far more convenient. So you have this ugly cable that runs from the front across the middle into your cup holders, where you're probably going to keep your phone most of the time. And you've also got these touch buttons here for your climate controls, which is fine. These are easy to operate, but they do show fingerprints and dust really easy. We get a 2-spoke steering wheel here with paddles on it for regen, a drive mode button as well. So we get 3 drive modes: Eco, Normal, and Sport. And the driver's instrument cluster looks cool, but it's hardly customizable. And you also get this ridiculous magnetic pad here, which you're probably never going to use because it will not support your phone. I don't know why people online seem to think that it can, but it will not support an iPhone with MagSafe, so I don't know how it will support anything else apart from a fridge magnet. And the intention was for this to be used for fridge magnets. Now don't get me wrong, it's cute, just like the baguette holder in the new Renault 5 EV and also the flower holder inside the Volkswagen Beetle, but yeah, it's a little bit useless. And you also still get that column shifter here as well. We get a nice open center area here that has a wireless charging pad and also a shallow little center console here, but this is pretty useful for small things like hiding your cables. And things I will say about this interior is that it's really well put together. It feels great, solid, high quality, and the materials feel quite nice as well. And I will say these seats are really comfortable for long trips, and I actually kind of prefer this material over a fake leather. But the Ioniq 5 has less power than ever, so does that make a difference when you're driving? You start up the Ioniq 5 by pressing this EV start-stop button. That's what it says on the button. It's just a start-stop button. I don't understand why it has to say EV on it. Once we've started, it's pretty quiet. It does make a little sound that sounds like it's saying Bumbleclut, and then we're ready to go. So this is the least powerful Ioniq 5 you can buy. So it gets 125 kilowatts and 350 Newton meters of torque sent all to the rear wheels. Shifting the drive is pretty easy, but you have to make sure that your foot is on the brake firmly, because I've found out that if it's not, the car does not like to shift into gear. The 360-degree parking camera is pretty useful. It's very clear and it's really easy to get into a tight space in this car. Yeah, the normal mirrors are a lot more useful than the camera mirrors, I find personally, to get close to a curb. Acceleration isn't that quick. It's 8.5 seconds to 100, but if you put this into sport mode, all 350 Newton meters of torque are available at 0 RPM, so you're able to feel like you're in a far more rapid car than the acceleration time suggests. And you know what? It's really all the acceleration you need, because off the line, you will get a lot of other cars by surprise, and this will accelerate quicker off the set of lights compared to some other cars. Those smaller wheels do make a big difference in terms of the ride quality. This feels so much more comfortable on a road out here, for example, in the city. It just really feels softly sprung as well. It feels nice and spongy on the road, and the dampening is really nice because it doesn't sort of duck dive. I've found some EVs on these big skateboard platforms will want to sort of duck dive like this. They want the front to go up and the back, and it sort of starts to feel like you're on a bit of a seesaw, but this feels really planted and it has a nice wide wheelbase, which does a great job of making sure you feel comfortable. Regen is adjustable through these paddles. I'm always in iPedal mode, which is the one pedal drive mode experience, which is quite good. And then when you go into brake as well, it's actually surprisingly quick to brake for such a heavy vehicle. So if we go for an emergency stop in 3, 2, 1, and it just does a really good job of pulling up. And it's a really easy car to drive. It's really pleasant. I've had a great time just hopping in this thing and getting going. What's great is that because the software hasn't been updated in this for 2024 Hyundais, you don't get an annoying speed limit warning, which happens when you exceed the speed limit that the car has read by reading the speed signs on the road. And if you go above it by even 1 kilometer an hour, it will start beeping you non-stop. And you have to go into the menus every time to turn it off, because it's not a one button turn off for the life of the car. You have to do that every time you hop into the car, because it resets every time you turn the car off. This car does not have that setting. Major win. I've just realized that that is so annoying that it's made me really not appreciate how good Hyundais are sometimes, because it's so distracting to the driving experience. But because we don't have it here, you're just reminded how easy it is to live with something like the Ioniq 5. I really like the radar cruise control here as well. It's really easy to activate, as we've activated right here, and you do have auto steering assist, which is very useful. And if you've got 2 painted white lines when you're on the highway, for example, this car will do a really good job of keeping you centered and steer for you, which is very good. Something I did find a little bit annoying is the motor sound. So at low speeds you can hear the actual sound generator inside the cabin, which is just annoying, especially when you're in crawling traffic, because it's background sound you don't really want to hear when you're in bumper to bumper traffic. But then when you're at higher speeds, I did find my younger ears, because I'm only 26, I can hear the high-pitched whirring of the electric motors. And to me, that's a bit annoying. To some other people, they won't be able to hear that, because as you get older, you can't really hear high-pitched sounds, but that was just very noticeable when you're on the highway, and it just became a background sound that didn't sound too pleasant, that I haven't really heard in too many electric cars. Now, to be honest, I'm driving around in eco and normal mode. I'm rarely in sport, but when I am, it's pretty pleasant to be able to feel like you are in a feels faster than it actually is type of EV. And rear-wheel drive is absolutely fine. Do not let anyone fool you to think that you need any more grip than this. Steering is a bit dead, but it's not too boring. Like, you can have a fun time steering this thing around some corners, but the Ioniq 5N will be your pick if you're looking for the best driving experience. But again, that thing is nearly double the price of this. And so the range actually hasn't been a big issue. This would be the biggest concern when buying the smallest battery version of the Ioniq 5, and it's actually been fine. Driving around the city, you can expect over 300 kilometers and pushing even 400 kilometers comfortably. But when you're on the highway, that's when this thing's gonna suffer. So the claimed real world range is under 300 kilometers according to evdatabase.org, but Hyundai claims this thing will get you over 380 kilometers of WLTP range. So to be honest, my driving experience has seen that it's probably going to be over 300 kilometers reliably in the city. Cornering suspension is the major win here. It's just that comfortable, visibility's great out of here, steering's nice and responsive, but yes, not too much feel in it, but it's pretty easy to sort of just guide your way through corners, and it feels a bit more engaging to drive than some other basic EVs. And if you are looking at buying something like the Hyundai Kona Electric, I'd be buying this instead. This is way better. But that's all I have to tell you about the Ioniq 5. It's pretty simple to drive, pretty easy to live with, but definitely not better than a Tesla. It's a quick buyer's advice here. If you don't want to buy a Tesla for whatever reason, you don't like the idea of a BYD, and you want something that's in between a sedan and a larger SUV, then the Ioniq 5 is a great option. And this base model is an awesome city runabout if that's what you want. But if you plan on going for road trips, you definitely should get something with a larger battery. But by no means is this the best bang for buck EV you can get. There are EVs with better range, better technology, and better features for this price point. But if you don't want to go with newer brands, you're gonna have to get this.